Have you ever felt like your job was slowly siphoning the life right out of you, all thanks to one person? What if that person knew you were desperate for a paycheck and used that desperation like a weapon? This isn't just a story about a bad boss. It's a deep dive into how one man exploited a shaky economy to turn a bustling office into a pressure cooker, pushing us to our absolute breaking point. Get ready to meet Arthur Thorne, the kind of boss who could make a saint curse, and see how his reign of terror eventually crumbled. My name's Alex, and I'd been at Synergy Innovations for just under 3 years when Arthur Thorne walked in. It was late March 2025, a time when whispers of a weakening job market were turning into full-blown shouts. News reports painted a grim picture: fewer opportunities, more instability. It felt like the ground beneath our feet was shifting, and then Thorne arrived, stomping all over it. He was brought in as the new head of operations, a position that put him squarely in charge of our entire department. From his crisp, expensive suits to his perpetual scowl, Thorne carried himself with an air of cold superiority. He was a man who looked like he'd never had to work a day in his life, yet he was about to make us work harder than we ever thought possible. The first few days were a blur of meetings where Thorne would stand at the head of the conference room, tapping a pen against his chin, his eyes scanning each of us like we were numbers on a spreadsheet. He didn't introduce himself with warmth or enthusiasm. Instead, his opening address was a thinly veiled threat. "Let's be clear," he'd said, his voice flat. "The economy is, shall we say, in a precarious state. Jobs aren't just handed out anymore. You're all fortunate to be here, and I expect you to earn that fortune every single day." It felt less like a welcome and more like a warning shot fired across our bows. My stomach churned with a mixture of unease and a desperate need to keep my head down. My rent wasn't going to pay itself, and losing a job in this climate felt like signing a death warrant for my financial stability. I remembered the article I'd read that morning about how job opportunities were shrinking, how everyone was just a number now. Thorne had clearly read the same article, but he'd interpreted it as a license to treat us however he pleased. Thorne's philosophy, as we quickly learned, was simple: maximum output for minimum input, especially when it came to our well-being. He was a master of micromanagement, a man who believed every single keystroke, every phone call, every coffee break needed his personal oversight. Our bustling office, once a place of lively collaboration, started to feel like a high-security prison. He'd pace the aisles between cubicles, his footsteps echoing ominously on the polished concrete floor, a yellow legal pad clutched in his hand. He'd stop abruptly, leaning over someone's shoulder, scrutinizing their screen. "Is that email absolutely vital, Marcus?" He'd snap at Marcus, our usually jovial marketing specialist. Marcus, who used to crack jokes that brightened our whole floor, would visibly shrink, his face turning a shade of pale green. His first major initiative was a new efficiency protocol he unveiled in early April. It mandated a detailed daily report from each of us, listing every task, every minute spent, every tiny win, and every minor setback. Not a simple summary, mind you, but a granular breakdown, emailed to him by 5:30 p.m. sharp. Miss the deadline, even by a minute, and a passive-aggressive email would land in your inbox. Subject line: regarding your punctuality. It wasn't about performance, it was control, about making us feel like children constantly under surveillance. The fear was palpable. We'd all seen the news, heard the stories of companies tightening their belts, of layoffs hitting without warning. Thorne was using that fear, that collective anxiety about the economy, to squeeze every last drop of productivity from us. He seemed to relish the power, the way our shoulders slumped when he walked by, the way our conversations died out. It was a suffocating feeling, like a heavy blanket draped over our once vibrant office culture. But that was just the beginning, a mere opening act in Thorne's grand play of workplace misery. His true colors started to bleed through when the first round of performance reviews came around, barely a month after his arrival. These weren't your typical check-ins. They were public spectacles designed to intimidate. He'd scheduled them in the glass-walled conference room, visible to anyone walking by, making sure everyone could witness the uncomfortable scenes unfolding inside. I remember Sarah, one of our graphics designers, a soft-spoken woman who always delivered stunning work, emerging from her review with tear-streaked eyes. She walked straight out of the office and didn't return for 2 days. Later, in hushed whispers over lukewarm coffee, she told us Thorne had berated her for lack of initiative, claiming her designs, though technically perfect, didn't push the envelope enough for the current competitive market. He'd even pulled up competitors' work, accusing her of being stuck in the past. It was brutal, completely uncalled for, and had nothing to do with her actual performance. My heart ached for her, but a cold dread also settled in my own chest. If Sarah, one of our best, could be treated like that, what hope did the rest of us have? I thought about my own review looming, my hands clammy just thinking about it. Then came the voluntary overtime initiative. In mid-May, Thorne called an all-hands meeting, beaming with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He announced that due to unprecedented market demands and the need to secure our position, we'll be implementing voluntary overtime. Voluntary, he stressed, but highly encouraged for those committed to Synergy's future. The implication was crystal clear. Those who didn't volunteer were not committed. We were already working through lunch breaks, staying late just to finish the normal workload, thanks to his efficiency protocols. My gut twisted. I had plans for my evenings, a life outside these walls, but the thought of being seen as uncommitted was a terrifying prospect in a job market that felt like a desert. My mind raced. Could I afford to say no? Could any of us? The silence in the room was deafening, a collective acknowledgement of the trap he was setting. I looked around, seeing the same fear reflected in the faces of my colleagues. The pressure intensified in June when Thorne began his weekend workflow push. He started sending emails on Friday evenings, suggesting we check in on projects over the weekend. What started as suggestions quickly became expectations. A teammate, David, who was a single father, politely pushed back, explaining his need for family time. Thorne's response was swift and chilling. In an all-staff email, he wrote, "While I respect personal commitments, I must reiterate that dedication to Synergy innovations often require sacrifices. Those unwilling to make them may find themselves unable to meet the evolving demands of this challenging economic climate." David, defeated, started logging in on Saturdays and Sundays, his eyes permanently shadowed. We all felt the heavy hand of Thorne's policy. My own weekends, once sacred pockets of relaxation, became tinged with anxiety, a constant nagging feeling that I should be working. I'd sit at home, trying to enjoy a book, but my phone would buzz with a new email from Thorne, and my stomach would clench. The line between work and life had blurred, then vanished entirely. It felt like Thorne owned us, body and soul. The constant grind began to take its toll. Sleepless nights became the norm. The usually vibrant office chatter turned into hushed, fearful whispers. People looked haggard, their eyes sunken, their usual spark extinguished. The break room, once a hub for commiseration and laughter, became a ghost town, everyone too afraid to take a proper break lest Thorne find them unproductive. I started having trouble focusing, my mind a constant whirlwind of fear and exhaustion. I felt a tightness in my chest, a persistent headache that wouldn't quit. My partner noticed the change, the way I'd jump at the slightest sound, the distant look in my eyes. "You're not yourself, Alex," they'd say, their voice laced with concern. "This job is killing you." And they were right. I was a shell of my former self, constantly battling the urge to scream in frustration. The stress was palpable, a thick, suffocating fog that permeated every corner of my life. In July, Thorne's favoritism became outrageously blatant. He hired his nephew, a recent college graduate named Kevin, into a senior project management role, a position that required years of experience. Kevin was, to put it mildly, spectacularly incompetent. He missed deadlines, alienated clients, and consistently blamed his mistakes on other team members. Yet Thorne shielded him, praising. The cheers and applause were muted, internal, but they roared in our hearts. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Thorne. The Viridian Corp deal, worth millions, was pulled immediately. The senior management, now emboldened by the client's public condemnation and the glaring evidence of Thorne's mismanagement, wasted no time. Within 48 hours, Arthur Thorne was gone. Not a resignation, mind you, but a termination. The news spread like wildfire, a collective sigh of relief sweeping through the cubicles, replacing the suffocating fear with a sense of cautious hope. It turned out a company-wide anonymous survey, initiated quietly by HR a few weeks prior, had already collected a mountain of complaints against Thorne, detailing his micromanagement, the unrealistic demands, the favoritism, and the general climate of terror he'd cultivated. Miss Davies's public rebuke was just the final nail in his coffin, proof that his behavior wasn't just internal, but had severely impacted critical external relationships. The office slowly started to breathe again. The forced smiles began to feel genuine. Coworkers started chatting freely in the break room, the sound of laughter slowly returning. My own tightness in my chest eased, the persistent headache finally receding. It was a stark reminder that no job, no paycheck is worth sacrificing your mental health, your dignity, or your sense of self-worth. It taught me, and all of us, that even in the most challenging economic climates, there are lines that should never be crossed. It showed us that even when you feel trapped, when fear is a constant companion, speaking up, or simply refusing to be complicit in injustice can sometimes be the catalyst for change. Lena's courage was a spark that ignited a much-needed fire. This whole ordeal reminded me that true leadership isn't about wielding power like a weapon. It's about empowering your team, even when times are tough. It's about respect, not fear. We learned the hard way that a boss who exploits vulnerability will inevitably find their own vulnerability exposed. Karma, it seems, has a funny way of leveling the playing field, especially when you push people too far.